On the morning of December 7th, 1941, at precisely 7:42, Second Lieutenant Charles MacDonald found himself standing beside his P-40 Warhawk at Wheelerfield in Hawaii. He watched dark plumes of smoke billowing upward from Pearl Harbor, located just 6 miles to the south. The devastating realization hit him hard. The Japanese had just obliterated the majority of the Pacific Fleet, and there wasn't a single thing he could do to stop it. He was 27 years of age. He'd been a fighter pilot for 2 years. His combat experience? Absolutely zero. The initial wave of the attack had struck an hour before this moment. 183 aircraft from Japan. 18 ships either sunk or severely damaged. 2,403 Americans killed. MacDonald finally managed to get his aircraft into the sky 90 minutes after the assault had concluded. For an hour and a half, he flew patrol duty above the harbor as it burned below him. There were no enemy aircraft to engage. Only smoke. Only wreckage. As he turned his aircraft back in the direction of Wheelerfield, his own countryman nearly ended his life. American gunners, their nerves frayed and raw, unleashed everything in their arsenal. 5-inch naval guns roared. 40mm buffers blazed. 50-caliber machine guns chattered. MacDonald found himself dodging a complete barrage of friendly fire, just trying to bring his own plane down safely. That single morning transformed everything. The pilot who had devoted 2 years to flying nothing but training missions in the tranquil skies of Hawaii was now staring down a war that would consume 4 entire years. A conflict where the majority of fighter pilots operating in the Pacific didn't make it past their first 6 months of service. Where the Japanese Zero fighters possessed the ability to both outmaneuver and outclimb nearly every American aircraft in the sky. Where missions could span 1,000 miles across nothing but open ocean, leaving you with nowhere to put down if your engine failed. For the next 2 years, MacDonald remained stationed in Hawaii. He trained fresh pilots. He flew endless patrol missions. He watched squadron after squadron ship out to active combat zones while he remained behind. By the time early 1943 arrived, he had accumulated over 1,000 flight hours in his logbook. His combat experience remained at 0. His kill count remained at 0. He was evolving into one of the most highly experienced peacetime fighter pilots in the entire Pacific theater. Everything shifted in June of 1943. MacDonald deployed to New Guinea alongside the 348th Fighter Group. His assignment involved flying P-47 Thunderbolts on escort duty for transport aircraft. It was, without question, the most tedious combat assignment available in the theater. 3 full months spent flying repetitive circles above supply planes. He didn't encounter a single enemy aircraft during that entire period. Then General George Kenney took notice of something important. The 475th Fighter Group required a new executive officer. This unit flew P-38 Lightnings, twin-engine configurations, twin-boom designs. Fighters with those distinctive forked tails. They were faster than the P-47, superior range capabilities, better rate of climb, and they were experiencing heavy, sustained combat on a weekly basis. On October 1st, 1943, Major Charles MacDonald officially joined the 475th Fighter Group at Dodorura in New Guinea. Satan's Angels, they were called. The very first all P-38 group in the entire 5th Air Force. Within just 3 weeks' time, he would achieve ace status. Within 6 weeks, he would assume command as their commanding officer. Within 20 months, he would demonstrate conclusively that the quiet pilot who had managed to survive Pearl Harbor was, in fact, one of the most lethal fighter commanders operating in the Pacific War. If you're interested in learning how MacDonald progressed from 0 kills all the way to 27 confirmed victories, ultimately becoming the 3rd highest scoring ace in the Pacific, please go ahead and hit that like button. Every single like assists us in sharing more of these forgotten stories from the Second World War. And please, subscribe to the channel. Let's return to MacDonald's story. His very first combat mission took place on October 2nd, a fighter sweep headed to Wewak, 50 P-38s in total. MacDonald flew in the wing position, observing, absorbing knowledge. The formation made contact with 15 Japanese fighters. The pilots with more experience managed to shoot down 3 of them. MacDonald fired his weapons for the very first time in actual combat. He missed everything he aimed at, but he came home breathing. That was sufficient for day 1. 3 weeks passed, and then everything changed completely. October 25th brought a mission to Rabo. The weather deteriorated badly. Heavy cloud cover, visibility dropped to 0. The majority of P-38 squadrons made the decision to turn back. MacDonald's flight pushed forward through the conditions. When they finally broke through into clear airspace, they discovered 24 B-24 bombers flying with almost no fighter escort whatsoever, and 60 Japanese Zero fighters diving down toward those bombers from positions above them. MacDonald faced a critical choice in that moment. He could run or he could fight. 6 P-38s against 60 Zeros. He made the choice to engage. What transpired during the following 11 minutes would come to define his entire experience in the war. MacDonald's P-38 was equipped with 4 50 caliber machine guns along with 1 20mm cannon, 2,300 rounds in total. Enough ammunition for approximately 15 seconds of continuous fire. The Zeros held advantages in climb rate. They were more maneuverable in turning engagements. Their 20mm cannons possessed the capability to shred a P-38's tail section with just one well-placed burst. However, the P-38 possessed 2 critical advantages of its own: superior speed when diving, and concentrated firepower positioned in the nose section. MacDonald advanced his throttles completely forward and dove directly into the formation of Zeros that were attacking the B-24s. The Japanese pilots weren't anticipating such aggressive action from merely 6 fighters confronting 60 of their aircraft. MacDonald released a 2-second burst at a distance of 300 yards. He missed his target. The Zero broke hard to the right. MacDonald pursued, pulled lead on the target, and fired once more. The Zero's left wing separated cleanly from the fuselage. The pilot never managed to escape the aircraft. His first confirmed kill, just 3 weeks after his arrival in the theatre. At 29 years of age, the engagement lasted 11 minutes total. MacDonald's flight darted repeatedly in and out of the bomber formation, clearing Zeros off the tails of the B-24s. The Japanese held numerical superiority. The Americans fought with pure desperation. When the Zeros finally disengaged and broke away, MacDonald conducted a count of his flight. 6 P-38s, every single one still airborne and functional. The B-24s had suffered the loss of 2 bombers. Without MacDonald's direct intervention, they would have lost half the entire formation. He brought his aircraft down at Dura with exactly 14 rounds of ammunition remaining. 2 weeks later, on November 9th, MacDonald flew escort duty for bombers conducting strikes on Alexis-Hoffen Airdrome. The Japanese launched 16 fighters to intercept. MacDonald successfully shot down 2 Zeks within a 4-minute span. 5 total kills now. He had achieved ace status. The very next morning, November 10th, 2 significant events occurred simultaneously. MacDonald received a promotion to lieutenant colonel, and the commanding officer of the 475th Fighter Group rotated back to the United States. General Kenny needed someone new for the CO position. He selected MacDonald, the quiet pilot from Pearl Harbor, the man who had waited patiently for 2 full years to see combat. He was now in command of 120 pilots and 3 complete squadrons of P-38 Lightnings, 29 years old, 40 days of actual combat experience, 5 victories to his name, now bearing responsibility for the most aggressive fighter group operating in the Pacific Theater. The 475th conducted missions that no other units could reach. Rabalo, Wewak, Hollandia, targets positioned 600 miles away from their base. The P-38's official range specification listed a 570-mile combat radius. Push that aircraft out to 600 miles, and you would exhaust your fuel somewhere over the open ocean. Dozens of pilots had already been forced to ditch in the water while attempting to make it back home. The majority were never recovered. MacDonald understood the core problem with complete clarity. Every single mission was fundamentally a fuel calculation. Every minute spent engaging in combat burned through fuel that you would desperately need for the flight returning home. The P-38 was powered by 2 Allison V-1000 710 engines, 1,200 horsepower from each one. Running at full combat power settings, they consumed 160 gallons every hour. The internal fuel tanks held a capacity of 410 gallons. Add 2 external drop tanks to that, and you gained another 600 gallons. That configuration provided maybe 6 hours of total flight time if you exercised extreme caution, but most targets required 7 hours of flight time for the round trip. The mathematics simply didn't work out favorably. Pilots were experimenting with leaning their fuel mixture settings. They were reducing RPM levels. They were trying absolutely everything to extend their operational range. Some techniques produced results. Others destroyed engines completely. MacDonald needed a genuine solution to this problem, something that would enable his P-38S to fly for 8 hours, perhaps even 9 hours. Something that would transform the Lightning from a short-range interceptor into a long-range escort fighter capable of protecting bombers all the way to targets the Japanese had assumed were completely untouchable. He had absolutely no idea that his solution would arrive within 6 months in the form of the most famous pilot in all of American history. A man who had flown across the Atlantic Ocean alone. A man who understood fuel efficiency with greater depth than any engineer serving in the military. A man who would teach MacDonald and his pilots the methods to make their P-38S fly 12-hour missions. But first, MacDonald needed to prove he possessed the ability to lead effectively. April 1944 brought Hollandia. The Japanese had concentrated the majority of their remaining air strength in New Guinea at this single base. 5th Air Force was committing every bomber they had available. The 475th would provide the fighter escort. MacDonald would lead his men from the front position. At 0615 on April 30th, 1944, MacDonald led a formation of 48 P-38s off the Nadab runway. Their destination was Hollandia, located 620 miles to the northwest, the longest escort mission his group had ever been tasked with attempting. The formation climbed steadily to an altitude of 20,000 feet. MacDonald performed a check of his fuel status. His external tanks displayed as full, internal tanks reading 410 gallons. He performed the range calculation mentally. 7 hours of flight time, assuming nothing went wrong during the mission. 1 hour positioned over the target area. That left absolutely zero margin available for either combat maneuvering or adverse weather conditions. At 0840 hours they crossed over the coastline. Nothing existed below them except ocean and dense jungle. No emergency landing fields anywhere. No rescue vessels positioned for recovery. If your engine quit on you, you ditched into the water and hoped desperately that someone witnessed you going down. At 0930 they rendezvoused successfully with 60 B-24 Liberators. The bombers were climbing steadily through 18,000 feet. MacDonald positioned his P-38S into a combat spread formation. 8 aircraft assigned to high cover duty, 16 aircraft flying close escort, 24 aircraft sweeping ahead of the main formation. Hollandia came into view at 10:15, 3 separate airfields, over 200 Japanese aircraft sitting on the ground below. The base had never experienced a daylight raid before this moment because it existed too far from Allied airfield positions. The Japanese weren't expecting any company whatsoever. The B-24s commenced rolling into their bombing runs. MacDonald's high cover element spotted movement developing. 20 Japanese fighters scrambling frantically from the main runway. Mostly Zeiks in composition. A few Tonys mixed in. They were climbing through 10,000 feet when MacDonald's forward sweep element hit them hard. The Japanese pilots confronted 2 serious problems simultaneously. They were still in their climb phase, and they found themselves outnumbered at a ratio of 2-1. The fight lasted exactly 6 minutes. The 475th claimed 14 Japanese fighters destroyed. They lost none of their own. The B-24s successfully destroyed 83 aircraft positioned on the ground. They cratered all 3 runways completely. MacDonald touched down back at Nadab with exactly 41 gallons remaining in his tanks, 11 minutes worth of fuel. The mission had consumed exactly 7 hours and 9 minutes total. Every single pilot made it home safely. By the time April concluded, Hollandia had fallen to Allied forces. The Japanese withdrew back toward Bio. The 475th relocated forward to Hollandia during May, then advanced to Waki Island in June, then pushed forward to Biak in July. Each move brought them physically closer to the Philippines. Each move translated to longer mission durations, bigger target priorities, more severe fuel problems. MacDonald's victory total continued climbing upward. 13 kills by the middle of June, 14 kills by the end of July. But his focus wasn't centered on personal scoring statistics. His focus remained fixed on keeping his pilots alive and operational. The 475th had suffered the loss of 23 pilots since October. The majority didn't perish in combat engagements. They died when they ran out of fuel over the open ocean, or when they pushed damaged aircraft beyond their operational limits, trying desperately to make it home. The P-38 was fast. It was deadly in combat, but it wasn't efficient with fuel consumption. The Allison engines weren't designed originally for long-range cruise operations. Push them too aggressively, and they overheated catastrophically. Run them too lean on mixture, and they quit entirely. Every pilot had developed his own personal technique. Some methods worked reasonably well. Most of them didn't work at all. MacDonald needed someone who truly understood engines at a fundamental level, someone who understood fuel management principles, someone capable of teaching his pilots how to fly 8-hour missions without destroying their aircraft in the process. In late June of 1944, that specific someone arrived at Hollandia. A tall civilian dressed in a khaki uniform, bearing no insignia whatsoever. He walked directly into the operations tent carrying a briefcase and requested to see the group commander. When MacDonald glanced up from his desk, the civilian extended his hand forward. "Charles Lindbergh," he said, "the first man to fly solo across the Atlantic, the single most famous pilot in the entire world, and he wanted to fly combat missions with the 475th. MacDonald's initial thought was that General Kenny had completely lost his mind. His second thought was that this civilian was about to get himself killed in action. His third thought was that maybe, just maybe, Lindbergh possessed knowledge about fuel management that could potentially save dozens of his pilots' lives. He turned out to be correct about the third thought, wrong about the second, and within just 4 weeks, Lindbergh would teach the entire 475th how to extend their P-38's operational range by 100%. Lindbergh devoted the first week to pure observation. He flew practice missions. He studied the P-38's instrument panels carefully. He asked detailed questions constantly. He noticed something immediately upon arrival. The pilots were operating their engines at 2,300 revolutions per minute with 46 inches of manifold pressure. Maximum continuous power settings. The exact technique every P-38 pilot learned during their training phase. It was also absolutely killing their effective range. On June 27th, Lindbergh flew his first combat mission alongside MacDonald, a routine patrol run to Jeffman Island. 4 aircraft total. MacDonald led the formation. Lindbergh flew the wing position. When they landed back at base, the other 3 pilots had between 30 to 40 gallons remaining in their tanks. Standard fuel state for a 4-hour mission duration. Lindbergh had 90 gallons remaining. MacDonald asked him how he'd accomplished this. Lindbergh explained the technique. Lower the RPM setting to 1,400. Increase manifold pressure to 30 inches. The engines will produce the same effective power output, but they'll consume 50 gallons less fuel per hour of operation. The technique violated every single rule written in the P-38 pilot's manual. The engineers had stated explicitly it would destroy the engines. Lindbergh stated clearly that the engineers were wrong in their assessment. MacDonald tested the technique on his very next mission, a 6-hour patrol run to Sumut. He landed with 70 gallons still remaining in his tanks, an entire hour of extra fuel, enough to fundamentally change everything. Within the span of a single week, Lindbergh was teaching the entire group. He stood in the briefing tent with a detailed chart displaying RPM and manifold pressure settings. The pilots responded with skepticism initially. Some believed he was completely insane. Lower RPM meant lower power output. Everyone knew that fundamental fact. Lindbergh explained the thermodynamics involved. Higher manifold pressure meant forcing more air into the cylinders. More air meant achieving better combustion. Better combustion meant extracting more power per gallon of fuel consumed. The RPM didn't matter nearly as much as everyone had been taught to believe. What truly mattered was overall efficiency. He proved his theory in the air, mission after mission. Lindbergh consistently returned to base with more fuel remaining than pilots who had flown identical flight profiles. After 2 full weeks, every single pilot in the 475th was utilizing his settings. After 3 weeks had passed, they were planning missions that had been completely impossible just a month earlier. The difference was absolutely staggering in its impact. Before Lindbergh's arrival, the P-38's combat radius was 570 miles. 6 hours of total flight time. After Lindbergh implemented his techniques, that number jumped dramatically to 700 miles. 8 hours of operation. Some pilots managed to push it all the way to 9 hours. The P-38 Lightning had just transformed into a long-range escort fighter, capable of reaching targets the Japanese had believed were completely safe from fighter attack. General Kenny received reports about the fuel savings in mid-July. He flew personally to Biak to witness the results for himself. Lindbergh briefed him thoroughly on the technique. Kenny issued immediate orders for every P-38 group in the entire 5th Air Force to adopt the new settings without delay. Within 2 weeks' time, every Lightning pilot operating in the theater was flying using Lindbergh's numbers. The strategic implications became apparent immediately. The Balikpapan oil refineries on Borneo, positioned 925 miles from Biak, previously completely unreachable by fighter aircraft. The bombers had been conducting strikes without any fighter escort whatsoever. They were taking devastating losses as a result. Now MacDonald's P-38S could provide fighter cover all the way to the target location and back home again, 12 to 14 hours spent in the cockpit. But it was suddenly possible. The 475th began planning the mission in late September. They would stage through Morotai, refuel there, launch at dawn, escort B-24S all the way to Balikpapan, destroy the refineries, return home. The Japanese oil supply depended critically on Balikpapan's output. Without it, their entire war machine would grind to a complete halt. But first, Lindbergh had one final mission to fly alongside MacDonald. July 28th arrived. What was supposed to be a completely routine patrol mission. What transformed into the day a civilian nearly got shot down by a Japanese fighter. And what would ultimately end Lindbergh's combat flying career while nearly destroying MacDonald's career as well. At 0920 that morning, MacDonald led a 4-ship patrol formation near Sam Island. Lindbergh flew in the number 3 position. They were supposed to be conducting checks for enemy shipping activity. No combat was expected during this sortie. The mission briefing had labeled it a milk run. The Japanese had different plans entirely. And within 30 minutes, MacDonald would be forced to make a split-second decision that would save the life of the most famous pilot in America while simultaneously putting his own career in serious jeopardy. At 0940 hours, MacDonald's 4-ship formation crossed the coastline near Amahai airstrip on Sram Island. Intelligence reports had indicated no enemy air activity in the area. The airstrip appeared completely abandoned from altitude. MacDonald was preparing to turn the formation toward home when his number 4 aircraft called out 2 contacts flying low, heading east toward the water. Mitsubishi Ki-51 Sonyas, 2-seat reconnaissance aircraft. They carried armament, but they were slow. Maximum speed of 263 miles per hour. The P-38 could achieve 400 miles per hour. This wasn't going to be a legitimate fight. It was going to be target practice. The first Sonya pilot spotted the P-38S and immediately dove for the deck, 50 feet off the surface of the water. Attempting to use speed and terrain masking to escape, MacDonald led his flight down after them. At 300 knots airspeed, they closed the distance within seconds. The trailing P-38S opened fire on the target. They missed completely. The Sonya was jinking aggressively, side to side, up and down. The pilot clearly knew exactly what he was doing. Then Lindbergh's P-38 pulled out of the formation. He had spotted the second Sonya aircraft. It was heading straight at him now, a head-on pass developing, both aircraft closing at a combined speed exceeding 600 miles per hour. Lindbergh's four .50 caliber machine guns and single 20mm cannon were pointed directly at the Japanese pilot's cockpit canopy. At 400 yards separation, both pilots opened fire simultaneously. Tracers crossed paths in the air between them. The Sonya's cannons blazed continuously. Lindbergh's guns hammered relentlessly. At 200 yards, Lindbergh pulled up hard on his controls. The Sonya couldn't follow the maneuver. Its control surfaces were shot to pieces. The aircraft stalled immediately, rolled inverted, and struck the water at 200 knots. Captain Saburo Shimatada never escaped from the cockpit. Lindbergh had secured his first and only aerial victory of the war. A civilian technical representative had just shot down a Japanese aircraft in actual combat. The mission report would officially list it as self-defense. Everyone involved knew it represented far more than that. They landed back at Biak at 11:15 hours. The ground crews noticed immediately that Lindbergh's P-38 had more fuel remaining than the others, as it always did. But they also noticed something else that stood out. Lindbergh was visibly shaking when he climbed out of the cockpit. The head-on pass had rattled him badly. He was 52 years old, too old to be engaging in dogfights with Japanese fighters. 3 days later, on August 1st, Lindbergh flew once more with MacDonald, another patrol mission, another supposed milk run, except this particular one wasn't going to be routine at all. At 10:20 hours, they encountered a flight of P-38s from the 49th Fighter Group, actively engaging 3 Zeros near Palau. MacDonald's flight moved immediately to assist them. The Zeros broke away in different directions. One went high, one went low. The third one disappeared directly into a cloud bank. Lindbergh was tracking the low aircraft when the third Zero came out of the clouds positioned behind him, dead astern, 300 yards away. Closing fast. The Zero pilot opened fire at 250 yards range. 20mm cannon rounds walked up Lindbergh's left boom section. One engine immediately started trailing smoke. MacDonald witnessed it happening. He was positioned 400 yards out from the engagement. Too far away for an effective deflection shot, he pushed his throttles to emergency war power and dove hard. The Zero pilot remained focused entirely on Lindbergh. He didn't see MacDonald coming in at all. At 100 yards separation, MacDonald opened fire, a head-on pass engagement. His concentrated nose armament tore completely through the Zero's cockpit. The Japanese fighter stalled immediately and spun down into the ocean. Lindbergh managed to make it back to Biak on one engine, 32 miles of distance. He landed with both hands locked tightly on the flight controls. When he finally shut down the aircraft, his entire left engine nacelle was scorched completely black. Another few seconds of fire and the flames would have reached the fuel tanks. That evening, General Paul Whartsmith flew directly to Biak. He summoned MacDonald into his office. The conversation lasted exactly 4 minutes total. Whartsmith issued MacDonald a 1-month punitive leave assignment. The official charge was allowing a national hero to get into a dangerous situation. Charles Lindbergh was a civilian. He wasn't supposed to be engaged in combat operations, and he definitely wasn't supposed to be getting shot at by Japanese fighters. Lindbergh departed the 475th the following morning. His combat flying was finished, but his fuel-saving techniques remained permanently in place. Every P-38 pilot operating in the Pacific was now flying missions that had been completely impossible just 2 months earlier. MacDonald spent the month of August in Australia, 1 full month of enforced rest while his group prepared for the single biggest operation of the entire war. October 1944 would bring the liberation of the Philippines, and when MacDonald returned in September, he would have 4 months remaining to prove that saving Lindbergh's life had been worth the cost to his career. MacDonald returned to the 475th on October 13th, 1944. His month of punitive leave was officially over. The group had relocated to Morotai during his absence. They were preparing for something exceptionally big. Every pilot knew precisely what was approaching: the Philippines. General MacArthur's famous promise, "I shall return." The invasion commenced on October 20th. Allied forces stormed ashore at Leyte. The Japanese committed everything they had remaining to stopping the advance. The 475th flew 6 complete missions on invasion day alone. MacDonald personally led 4 of them. Fighter sweeps over the beach landing areas. Ground attack runs on Japanese defensive positions. Escort duty for bombers hitting enemy airfields. By October 24th, the group's advanced echelon had successfully landed at Leyte. By October 26th, MacDonald was operating directly from Tacloban airfield, a dirt strip that had been carved straight out of jungle terrain. No concrete surfaces, no proper facilities, just fuel drums and ammunition crates scattered around. The P-38s took off from mud surfaces and landed in mud, but they were positioned 300 miles closer to the Japanese home islands now. The strategic situation was shifting dramatically. With Leyte secured firmly, the Allies controlled a forward operating base. Now they could reach targets that had been safe from attack for 3 full years. Balikpapan topped that target list. The oil refineries on Borneo, 925 miles from Biak, 750 miles from Morotai. Without those refineries continuing to operate, Japan's entire oil supply would collapse completely. 5th Air Force planned 5 major strikes during October. The 475th would fly fighter escort for all of them, using Lindbergh's fuel settings throughout, 12 to 14 hours in the cockpit per mission. The longest fighter missions in the entire Pacific War. October 14th brought the first Balikpapan raid. MacDonald led 36 P-38s staging through Morotai. They launched at 0655 hours. Rendezvoused with 101 B-24 Liberators at 0830, climbed to an altitude of 18,000 feet, set cruise power precisely, 1,400 revolutions per minute, 30 inches of manifold pressure, exactly what Lindbergh had taught them. The formation crossed 600 miles of nothing but open ocean, no emergency landing fields anywhere, no rescue coverage for the first 400 miles of distance. At 1,040 hours they reached Balikpapan. The oil refineries stretched along the coastal area, storage tank farms, cracking plants, pipeline networks. The B-24s rolled into their bombing runs. Japanese fighters appeared at 1,100 hours. 43 Zeros and Oscars scrambling from nearby airfields. They hit the formation from above. MacDonald's high-cover element engaged them immediately. The fight scattered across 20 miles of sky. Lieutenant Joseph Forrester shot down a Zeke, then took cannon fire directly in his left engine. Oil pressure dropped to absolute zero. He feathered the propeller and headed for home on one engine, 600 miles over water. Most pilots would have bailed out over land. Forrester trusted Lindbergh's numbers completely. He made it back to Morotai 7 hours later, with exactly 11 gallons remaining. The 475th claimed 30 Japanese fighters destroyed that day, lost 3 P-38s. All 3 pilots were successfully recovered by submarines. The B-24s destroyed the Pandansari refinery and inflicted severe damage on the Edtelanu plant. Japanese oil production at Balikpapan dropped 70% overnight. 3 more raids followed in succession, October 18th, November 3rd, November 9th. Each time, MacDonald's P-38s flew 12-hour missions. Each time, every one of them came home. The fuel savings Lindbergh had discovered were now actively keeping pilots alive over distances that would have been absolute suicide just 6 months earlier. By late November, MacDonald's victory total stood at 23 confirmed kills. He had shot down 13 aircraft within 7 weeks, most of them over the Philippines. His group had claimed 147 enemy fighters destroyed since October began, but raw numbers didn't tell the real story here. The real story was that the 475th was flying missions no other fighter group could possibly reach, protecting bombers that would have gone in completely alone otherwise, covering ground forces that desperately needed air support. All of this because one civilian had taught them how to manage their fuel properly. December approached rapidly. Intelligence reports indicated heavy Japanese reinforcements moving toward Ormoc Bay on Leyte's west coast. General MacArthur planned another amphibious landing operation. December 7th, 3 years to the day after Pearl Harbor, and MacDonald would lead the air cover for the operation that would break Japanese resistance in the Philippines. But first, he had one more mission to fly. December 6th. The briefing that would set up the most intense day of combat the 475th had ever experienced. A day when MacDonald would shoot down 3 aircraft, earn his second Distinguished Service Cross, and prove conclusively that the quiet pilot from Pearl Harbor had become one of the most effective fighter commanders in the entire Pacific theater. At 0530 on December 7th, 1944, MacDonald briefed 36 pilots in the operations tent at Tacloban. The mission was simple in concept: provide continuous air cover for Allied forces landing at Ormoc Bay, keep Japanese aircraft away from the invasion fleet, stay overhead from dawn until dusk. Simple didn't translate to easy. Intelligence reported over 100 Japanese fighters within striking range of Ormoc. The enemy knew this landing would cut their supply line. They would throw everything at it. MacDonald launched at 0615 hours. His P-38, Put Maru, had the number 100 painted on both boom sections. Group Commander aircraft. He had flown it for 13 months straight, 23 victories. Not a single scratch on it. The formation arrived over Ormoc Bay at 0700 hours. The invasion fleet stretched along the entire coastline. Transports, landing craft, destroyers providing fire support. MacDonald positioned his fighters in a combat air patrol pattern. 8 aircraft on high cover at 15,000 feet. The remainder rotating through at lower altitudes. At 0740 hours, Japanese fighters appeared, 12 Oscars diving from the north. MacDonald's high cover intercepted them at 12,000 feet. The fight lasted 4 minutes. 3 Oscars went down, the rest broke for home. At 0820 hours, another group appeared, 15 Zeeks. This time, MacDonald led the intercept personally. He caught the lead fighter in a high side pass, 2-second burst. The Zeke's engine exploded. MacDonald rolled inverted and dove after another one. Caught it at 8,000 feet, 1 second of fire. The Zero's wing folded. 2 kills in 6 minutes. His total stood at 25. But the Japanese weren't finished yet. At 0900 hours, 3 more enemy fighters broke through the patrol line heading directly for the transports. MacDonald was at 14,000 feet. Too high. Too far away. The fighters would reach the ships before he could intercept them. He pushed his throttles to war emergency power and dove vertically, straight down. The airspeed indicator passed 400 knots. Then, 450. The P-38's airframe started buffeting violently. MacDonald ignored it completely. At 4,000 feet, he pulled out. 4 Gs, 5 Gs. His vision narrowed dramatically. He stayed conscious, barely. The 3 enemy fighters were lining up on a transport ship. MacDonald closed to 200 yards, opened fire. The rear fighter exploded. The other 2 broke away. MacDonald followed. Caught the second one in a climbing turn. His guns hammered. The fighter came apart. 27 victories. 3rd highest scoring ace in the Pacific theater. He didn't know it yet. The day wasn't over. The 475th flew 6 more missions over Ormoc Bay that day. The group claimed 27 enemy aircraft destroyed, lost 2 P-38s. Both pilots were recovered safely. The invasion succeeded. Japanese resistance in the Philippines began collapsing. 18 days later, on Christmas morning, MacDonald led a fighter sweep over Clark Field. The Japanese launched everything they had, defending their last major airfield complex. MacDonald shot down 3 fighters in one mission, his second time accomplishing that feat in less than 3 weeks. He was awarded his second Distinguished Service Cross. January 1945 brought more missions, more victories. The 475th supported ground forces advancing on Manila. By February, American troops controlled the capital city. By March, organized Japanese resistance in Luzon had ended. On March 13th, MacDonald scored his final victory, a lone Japanese fighter over northern Luzon, his 27th kill. He never sought recognition for it, never announced it. The mission report listed it alongside 8 other victories that day, just another number in the group's tally. In July 1945, MacDonald received orders. Return to the United States. His combat tour was over. 20 months, commanding the 475th Fighter Group. 27 confirmed victories. 2 Distinguished Service Crosses. Over 400 combat missions flown. He had started the war surviving Pearl Harbor. He was ending it as one of the most successful fighter aces in American history. But the number that mattered most to him wasn't his victory total. It was the pilots who had made it home, using fuel management techniques a civilian had taught them, flying missions that shouldn't have been possible, protecting bombers over distances that had killed dozens of pilots before Lindbergh arrived. MacDonald handed command to his executive officer on July 15th. He flew his P-38, Put Maru, one final time, a farewell flight over Luzon. Then he climbed out of the cockpit, saluted his crew chief, and walked away from the aircraft that had carried him through 2 years of combat. What happened next would define the rest of his life. The quiet fighter ace who never sought glory, who commanded from the front, who saved a national hero and paid the price. The war was ending. MacDonald's story was just beginning. MacDonald returned to Washington, D.C. in August 1945. The war in the Pacific ended while he was in transit. 20 years old when Pearl Harbor was attacked. 30 years old when it ended. He had spent 4 years of his life preparing for combat, and 20 months actually fighting. The Army Air Forces assigned him as legislative liaison to the House Armed Services Committee, a desk job, briefing congressmen on Pacific air operations, explaining budgets, testifying about aircraft procurement. He hated every single minute of it. But he did it for 3 years without complaint. That was who MacDonald was. Quiet, professional, did what needed doing. In 1949, he graduated from the Air War College at Maxwell Air Force Base. Then command assignments followed. The 33rd Fighter Group, the 23rd Fighter Wing. In the 1,952nd, he served as air attaché to Sweden. In the 1,962nd, he taught at the War College, training the next generation of fighter commanders. He retired as a colonel in 1966, 27 years of service. Started as a second lieutenant watching Pearl Harbor burn. Finished as a colonel who had helped win the Pacific War. He never talked much about his victories, never wrote a memoir, never gave speeches at reunions. Other aces became famous. Dick Bong, Tommy Maguire. MacDonald went sailing. He bought a boat in Sweden, spent 5 years sailing the Pacific and Caribbean with his wife. In 1971, he closed his real estate business and sailed to Mexico. In 1973, they returned to San Diego and built a new boat. They sailed until his wife died in 1978. Then MacDonald came ashore for good. He settled in Mobile, Alabama, the town where he had grown up, lived quietly. Few people knew he had been the 3rd highest scoring ace in the Pacific. Fewer knew he had commanded the 475th Fighter Group for 20 months. Even fewer knew he had saved Charles Lindbergh's life. The techniques Lindbergh taught lived on. Every P-38 pilot manual was updated with the fuel management settings. 1,400 revolutions per minute. 30 inches of manifold pressure. The numbers that extended the Lightning's range by 100%. Thousands of pilots used them. Hundreds made it home who wouldn't have otherwise. The 475th Fighter Group ended the war with 552 confirmed aerial victories, more than any other P-38 group in the Pacific. They flew missions to targets nobody else could reach. Balikpapan, Clark Field, Formosa, all because of fuel efficiency techniques a civilian discovered and MacDonald implemented. MacDonald's P-38, Put Maru, survived the war. The aircraft is now displayed at the Lone Star Flight Museum in Galveston, Texas, restored to its wartime configuration. Number 100 painted on both booms. 27 victory markers below the cockpit. Visitors can see the gun ports that fired thousands of rounds in combat. the cockpit where MacDonald spent hundreds of hours over the Pacific, the aircraft that carried him through 20 months of war without a scratch. Charles MacDonald died on March 3, 2002. He was 87 years old. The obituaries mentioned his 27 victories, his distinguished service crosses, his command of the 475th. What they couldn't measure was his impact, the pilots he trained, the techniques he implemented, the lives saved by fuel management nobody thought possible. He was buried with full military honors, a flag-draped coffin, a 21-gun salute, taps played over a cemetery in Alabama, far from the Pacific Islands where he had fought, far from the smoking wreckage of Pearl Harbor where his war began. The quiet pilot who never sought glory, who commanded from the front, who saved America's most famous aviator and paid the price, who proved that leadership wasn't about personal victory counts. It was about bringing your people home alive. 27 confirmed victories, 500 combat missions, 20 months commanding the most effective fighter group in the Pacific Theater. Charles MacDonald, Satan's Angels, Put Maru. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about fighter pilots who changed how aircraft fought. Stories about civilians who taught military pilots lessons that saved thousands of lives. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You are not just a viewer, you are part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Charles MacDonald doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen.